Okay, you could argue that this is the most important testimony that you've heard so far in this case. It's from the defendant himself talking about what happened at the moment of that shooting. I want to bring back in Rachel Kugel to talk about it. Rachel, is there validity in what he's saying in this argument that no one told me where the shooting was coming from? Because remember, gunshots rang out. I didn't know what this car was about. I knew my partner was running there. A lot was going on. Is there anything that's valid in that for the jury to consider?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's doing a good job. I think there's a few things that are valid about it. One is his demeanor overall, right? I mean, he's achieving what they need to achieve from a defense standpoint, which is he's coming off not as a hothead or crazy person or angry. He's coming off calm. He's coming off collected, and I think they need that. I think if he gets angry, this goes south for them. So I think he's doing that well. In terms of what he's doing, right, he's taking apart what we're seeing on this video, and he's taking it apart in pieces, and it is valid because what matters here is what's in his mind, and that's really all that matters, right? Whether what's in his mind is reasonable. And so he's trying to explain why that was reasonable in the time. The only thing I think you have to be careful of is, you know, the video makes it out better, in my humble opinion, because you can feel, it's palpable, what was going on in that moment. The craziness, the panic, you know, and if he calms it down too much, you might lose some of that. So I think that's the only thing you need to be worried about here.
That's an interesting perspective. I didn't think about it like that. Yeah, when you watch that video, you imagine what would you do in that situation? What would you do if you were put there, and what would happen because it was so chaotic?
Right, and you're sort of, you know, damned if you do and damned if you don't, because, you know, he's got a bunch of teenagers around, a potential active shooter situation. If he does nothing and the shooter is inside that car and other people around get injured or teenagers get killed because there's an active shooter, then what, right? So he's in a very tough situation in that moment.
Being an officer in that situation is very tough, but at the end of the day, he acknowledges he made a horrible, horrible mistake. And we're going to learn a little bit more about the very moment that he opened fire. Stay tuned. Okay, everybody, that is some more of the incredible testimony from the defendant himself. Now, I want to update you about what's going to happen today. I misspoke earlier. We are going to be live in the Roy Oliver case, but we don't think the closing arguments will happen today. We believe that will happen Monday because we believe today the state will call some rebuttal witnesses, probably because the defense put on, well, you be the judge, a strong case so far. Let's talk a little bit more about it with Rachel Kugel. Rachel, this is helping their case, I can imagine, because what's the standard here? Yeah. What's the standard for the self-defense of others that he was trying to protect his partner and everybody else who was around there? Is that what was going on in his mind or a reasonable person? So
I think it's what was going on in his mind, and then the reasonableness just comes into sort of a credibility kind of decision-making. In other words, it's what was going on in his mind, and then the jury gets to ask themselves, well, is what was going on in his mind unreasonable or reasonable? In other words, can I believe what he's telling me was going on in his mind? So it's actually about what's going on in his mind. I actually thought, you know, when they took that testimony from his partner Gross about, and he testified, I believe, that he didn't feel that he was in danger for his life. I actually feel like that was objectionable. I think that's potentially appealable. I don't think he should have gotten to answer that question because it's not relevant and it's damning to him.
It doesn't matter what his partner felt.
That's right.
So in other words, if let's say somebody was turned around and a perpetrator's coming behind them to hit him with a hammer, they didn't know at that very moment that there was a threat.
That's right. I mean, it doesn't matter what Gross thought about whether he was in danger or not, and I think that's actually been the most damning thing against the defendant in this case, has been that piece of testimony. If he is convicted, I think that's appealable.
But let's play devil's advocate here. If he's not convicted, the facts are he killed an innocent 15-year-old boy. How is that not punishable? How is that not? How can that be excusable? Right. So if I'm sitting here, law aside, I'm a juror, and I'm thinking about this, or I'm watching from one of our fans on Law and Crime, this guy killed an innocent person.
Yeah. I mean, what it comes down to is that, you know, there's no doubt that there's culpability and there's liability, and the question is whether that culpability and liability rises to the level of a crime, and not just any crime, but the crime of murder, because we were discussing whether that was maybe too high a charge in a case like this in terms of what the state could actually prove. There is no doubt he did something wrong. there is no doubt that this boy should not have died. I mean, those things are set aside. No doubt that something bad happened here that shouldn't have happened. The question is, does it rise to a level of criminal responsibility? That's a hard question for a jury, right? Because it's a hard question even for lawyers sometimes to differentiate between civil liability and responsibility versus criminal. What we're asking that jury to do is to do something that's very difficult even for seasoned lawyers to do.
Absolutely. And we talked about a little bit in the break about if he would be charged with murder or something less, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more of that on the upside of this break. We're going to take a break on our end, and when we come back, a lot more with Roy Oliver. That's some more of the defendant's testimony, and we are live right now in the Roy Oliver case. The defense just rested. This is the prosecution's first rebuttal witness. We're going to jump in there in a minute, but before we do, I want to ask something of my guest, Rachel Kugel. Rachel, my question to you is, as we watch this, the earlier part of his testimony was a lot about his service in Iraq and how he was serving in the military. In fact, at one point, his job was to protect a lieutenant colonel. That was his whole job. Make sure that lieutenant colonel gets home safe. Make sure his people in his team get home safe. What is the defense trying to pinpoint there, and is it effective?
Well, I think two things. One is, make him sympathetic, show that he is someone capable, was trusted in that way, served in that way, served his country, but also that others trusted his ability to do so and relied on his decision-making. I think that helps the jury rely on his decision-making as well. But I think also, trying to sort of equate this to being in that kind of moment, that, being in the field as a police officer is not that unlike being a soldier. The people rely on you, professionals rely on you, and that's what he's there for.
It's pretty amazing to watch. All right, everybody, we're going to go live right now. This is the state's first rebuttal witness. Okay, this is great testimony. Yesterday, you heard the defendant explain this road rage incident, and now the prosecution is able to bring in their own witnesses about what happened. Rachel, what do you think about this testimony so far?
And don't forget, this was evidence that previously was ruled inadmissible, right? So the defense opened the door to this evidence by having their client testify and obviously that then opened the door to this issue coming in. So this was stuff that wasn't supposed to be heard. Defense had to make a tactical choice of putting him on the stand, but bringing this in, obviously, I mean, it's pretty damning, right? If he did this just a couple weeks before, taking out his gun, they're trying to paint him as a, crazy lunatic. Basically, he pulls his gun at the drop of a hat.
And her crying on the stand isn't helping his case.
No, definitely not, saying she's in fear for her life, that she hoped it was her instead of her sister. All bad stuff. I think it's objectionable. I think it's appealable, but that's unfortunately for another day. Another day.
And what's interesting is you hear the parallels between the fear that she felt being gunned down by Roy Oliver, as well as the parallels from people that were in the car with Jordan Edwards, who felt that they were going to die that very night, too. Pretty incredible. We have to take a break, and when we come back, we will go live into the courtroom. Stay tuned. All right, well, that was fun. Let's learn a little bit more here with Rachel. Rachel, what is going on here? Did they do an effective job of cross-examining this witness? Things got a little testy, and she had some attitude there.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think there were a couple points they were trying to make. One was this whole issue of whether Roy Oliver was in possession of her documents, her state ID. I think what's important to note there is the reason he's trying to get at that, and it's not just for the sake of it, right? She's indicating that Roy Oliver had his gun drawn at her face the whole time, and that's how she remembers it, and she's sure, and she's, scared to death and all of this. What he's trying to make it out to be is more the way a police officer walks up to any police officer involved stop, where a gun is sort of pointed down. In other words, he didn't have it the whole time, and he couldn't have had it the whole time because he took her license and registration and insurance, right? And so that's what the point they're trying to make with whether or not he's holding those documents is whether he in fact had the gun kind of pointed at her the whole time, or whether in fact he treated this as a stop in which his gun was involved, at some point putting it down to gather her documents.
Pretty fascinating stuff, because this happened right before the shooting, a couple of weeks before, and you heard the defense trying to say, well, he had his family with him too, so maybe he was trying to protect his family. Keep trying to emphasize that he is a protector. We have a new witness on the stand right now. Let's go live. All right, well, that was fun. Let's learn a little bit more here with Rachel. Rachel, what is going on here? Did they do an effective job of cross-examining this witness? Things got a little testy, and she had some attitude there.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think there were a couple points they were trying to make. One was this whole issue of whether Roy Oliver was in possession of her documents, her state ID. I think what's important to note there is the reason he's trying to get at that, and it's not just for the sake of it, right? She's indicating that Roy Oliver had his gun drawn at her face the whole time, and that's how she remembers it, and she's sure, and she's, you know, scared to death and all of this. What he's trying to make it out to be is more the way a police officer walks up to any police officer involved stop, where a gun is sort of pointed down. In other words, he didn't have it the whole time, and he couldn't have had it the whole time because he took her license and registration and insurance, right? And so that's what the point they're trying to make with whether or not he's holding those documents is whether he in fact had the gun kind of pointed at her the whole time, or whether in fact he treated this as a stop in which his gun was involved, at some point putting it down to gather her documents.
Pretty fascinating stuff, because this happened right before the shooting, a couple of weeks before, and you heard the defense trying to say, well, he had his family with him too, so, you know, maybe he was trying to protect his family. Keep trying to emphasize that he is a protector. We have a new witness on the stand right now. Let's go live. All right, not looking so good for the defendant after that whole series of testimony. Let's bring back in Rachel Kugel to talk about it. The defense has tried every which way to say maybe he was justified in taking that gun out. What were they trying to say? That they didn't really see when he took the gun out? Maybe the first witness we heard was rummaging through something. Maybe that he thought she had a weapon?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things. One is, you know, he's trying to kind of give the appearance that even though he's off duty, he's sort of treating this as a police officer stop, that he's kind of acting in his capacity as a police officer. I also think that they're trying to point out that there are discrepancies in the two stories, right? So this witness does remember her sister getting a ticket for not having a license, for example. You know, this witness remembers a hat. The other witness has him as bald. You know, what I think is an interesting point that the defense could make, possibly on summations here, even if, you know, to kind of counter the parts that hurt them, is to say, look, if you are in fear, let's say it happened, you know, let's say it did happen. It just goes to show you that if you are really in fear for your life, how tunnel vision you get, how difficult it is to know whether that car is coming or going, right? And we're seeing through these witnesses that claim that they're scared for their lives, how difficult it is to know these specific details, right? And it just goes to show you that when you're in a moment like that, those kind of things do become difficult to recall and hazy and hard to know exactly what's going on in that moment when you get into that tunnel vision.
I love, you got to correct me, but defense attorneys love when they can catch a witness in an inconsistency. But again, how much is it that they're not telling the truth about what happened? How much are they already pointing the finger at Oliver because they know what's happening to him?
Right.
Or how much is it they were held at gunpoint in the car, and maybe their details are a little bit different? Or then again, like I said, the first part.
Right, but doesn't that, let's say that's true. Let's say they were held at gunpoint in the car and their details, therefore, are a little bit different. Doesn't that, in a sense, conceptually, kind of make their point about whether Oliver thought the car was coming or going when he was in that kind of fear for his life situation? In other words, doesn't it sort of make the point that when you get in that adrenaline, fear for your life situation and go tunnel vision, you know, these things, these details can seem hazy?
Pretty incredible stuff. I mean, that is something that the defense didn't want to be put in evidence. They didn't want the jury to hear it. He talked about it when he was up on the stand, and now they have to explain it. A lot of explaining to do. So let's go back live into the courtroom right now. We have a new witness is on the stand. Again, the state is putting on their rebuttal case. These are their rebuttal witnesses. Let's learn what's going on. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about the Roy Oliver case. We're live in that courtroom, and now a witness is being called by the prosecution to talk about when Roy Oliver testified in a 2013 case and was uncooperative on the stand. He was a hostile witness and even said a vulgarity on the stand. But why does this even matter? I want to bring in, because unfortunately it's our last time with her, she has to go, criminal defense attorney Rachel Kugel. Rachel, what's the point of this?
I mean, as a defense attorney, I'm like jumping out of my chair over here. Like, I want to object and go crazy. I have no idea why this is being allowed by this judge. This seems to me totally, you know, offensive to the rule of anything at this point. I mean, what are we trying to say? That this guy has been a pain in the butt at some points, has been difficult, has been nasty, has said bad words? I mean, do we want to be in a situation where every moment that we might have not acted the perfect person in our profession gets brought out like this? I mean, it just seems to me extraordinarily unfair and a character witness taken to its nth degree. Yeah,
I'm not sure what the point of it is, but we'll have to see. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on this morning. It was great having you. So let's go back live into the courtroom and we can find out what's going on.